Here we have the Phillips M8048 or 8048. This is what's known as a module rack. This is known as an FMS as well. Sometimes you'll hear I need an FMS rack. So FMS just means flexible module server. So basically what that means is we can put in all of our individual parameters or measurement modules as the physician calls for. So they may need some spread of certain types of modules. They might want things like NIBP, SpO2, ECG. They may also want more additional measurements that are a little more unique, like SVO2 or even BIS or BIS monitoring. So what this is going to do, it's going to connect to the monitor, and it's going to allow those measurement modules to then be displayed on that monitor. This can be used with the MP series, can also be used with the MX series Philips monitors. So with the M8048, you can use the single parameter modules. So they simply will slide right into the rack and they'll click into place. With this particular module now, we're gonna have SVO2 measurements. And with this module, we have the option for what's called press, which is just going to be an invasive blood pressure. So the clinician calls for an invasive blood pressure. They only are going to have one option for invasive blood pressure on the MMS, but for some reason they need two. This is how they're going to get that. They want the unique measurement of SVO2. This is how they're going to get it, is by adding this module to it. On the Philips M8048 module rack, we can also plug in the multi-measurement server. So we've gone over multi-measurement servers, but you will have SpO2, ECG, NIBP, and can have the option again of pressure and temperature. This can slide into the side rack and clips right in. And now we have numerous measurements available to that clinician, with everything on the multi-measurement server, plus the additions of the singular modules as well. We can put up to 8 expansion or modules into the rack. Of course, if they're these 2x, this is going to take up 2 spaces, so that's not going to give us 8. But of the standard kind of smaller singular ones, we can put 8 units in there. There are some limitations on how many of each type we can use with this rack. That information can be found in the service manuals or user manuals. So only a certain number of certain types of modules can be used at one time. So the M8048 module rack is going to connect to the monitor for all the parameters and measurements to be displayed via an MSL connector. So you're going to have just a standard MSL cable. This will plug into the monitor, allow those modules to be read and seen and visualized. A lot of times these can be mounted in the clinical setting with a pole mount. So they may have it set on top of something just like this, similar nature, and it will be mounted to that pole. You may also have the monitor on an arm right here, and then other medical products also mounted in and around it. So that is an option for this, is to mount it via that pole mount on the back. This is the Philips M8048A. So here we have a module rack. This is a bit of a more antiquated rack. This was actually manufactured by Agilent, who eventually rolled into Philips and HP as well. So this is going to house your basically single servers. So you're going to have individual measurements. On this one right here, we have pressure for an invasive blood pressure or IBP. And then we have a more unique measurement right here in the SVO2 measurement. But basically you would plug in any of the types and mixtures of measurements you'd want. You're probably going to have your standards like ECG, SpO2, NIBP individualized in this rack, and then you're going to add on based off what the clinician needs. This one's going to connect with a built-in pole mount, so that's very typical on module racks. And then you're going to have your connector that's going to connect it to the monitor right there and then allow you to get visualization on these. So very simply just kind of slide in and out. You can move and interchange them how you need. So this is the 1041 or M1041A module rack. So here we have the Phillips 1006B, and this is their press or pressure module. This is going to give the physician or clinician the ability to have an invasive blood pressure on the patient. We all know what the NIBP or non-invasive cuffs are. You see them at your CVS or local pharmacy that you have. This is going to be the opposite of that, and it's going to be invasive. So with that invasive pressure, that's going to give the physician or clinical staff the ability to look at beat-to-beat pressure of the heart. So every single systolic, diastolic beat of the heart, they will attain a reading. This is the most accurate way to get blood pressure, as opposed to a more inaccurate blood pressure cuff on the arms or legs that we all are familiar with and have seen. This is actually going to take a sensor, and it's going to be inserted into typically a patient's arm through a cannula, and you'll have a pressure sensing transducer that goes right into your vein or artery, and it's going to be picking up that pressure from your heart, like I said, for every single beat. So a physician might order this on a patient who's a little less stable or potentially has other comorbidities or other facts about them that they would want to have this more invasive measurement on them. Maybe they're a heart patient, and that would be another good reason to have that invasive blood pressure or pressure module. This is the Phillips M1006B. So now I'm holding the Phillips M1021A module. This is going to be your SVO2, and that's going to stand for your saturation venous oxygenation levels. So rather than your standard SpO2, which is going to be a non-invasive probe that's going to have the light shooting right into your finger to measure the oxygenation levels of your blood, this one is actually going to have an electrode that's going to go directly via cannula into your vein or artery. And inside of that, we'll have the light, which is going to gather direct information about the levels of oxygenation within your blood. So this would be a more of an invasive measurement to measure that same measurement as an SpO2, but this is going to be the SVO2, so the venous oxygenation. And that's the Phillips 1021A. Now I'm holding the Phillips M1015A, and this is specifically going to measure EtCO2. So it will plug in a little cable to the front, and it's going to attach to the patient's respiration tube, and then you're going to get side stream sampling on CO2, respired CO2 from the patient. So there's two ways of sampling CO2. One of them is going to be mainstream, one of them is going to be side stream. This module is going to take that side stream sample. So on the intubation tube that's going into an anesthetized patient, you're going to have a plug-in onto that intubation tube, and that is going to then feed right into this module. The respired gases or respired breath from the patient is going to go right into the module, and this module is going to measure CO2 using an IR or infrared bench or infrared light, and then that will be transmitted and shown on the monitor. This is going to be your Phillips M1015 CO2 module. This is going to be your Phillips M1034A, or your BIS, often referred to as BIS. That's actually going to stand for Bispectral Index. So this little module is going to be used typically in a OR setting with an anesthetized patient, and it's going to measure their level of consciousness. So a doctor or physician or anesthesiologist doesn't want a patient to be awake during surgery, and certainly they don't want them to be dead. So ultimately they want them to be in some state right in between. This is going to be used on a patient who's probably a little more sensitive, maybe an elderly patient or patient with different comorbidities going on, so different health issues. And so they're going to want a really specific anesthetic level. And so the way that this one's going to work, it's going to plug in right here to your patient cable. Then that's going to go to an additional little piece, which you could call an attainment module. And then from there, you're going to have electrodes that are going to attach to the patient's scalp. And what it's doing basically is taking EEG or electroencephalogram, so it's looking at electrical current of the brain itself, and it's looking at your level of consciousness. This is going to be the Phillips M1034A BIS module. So here I'm holding the Phillips 1000 or M1002A. This is going to measure ECG / respiration. So you're going to have the patient cables attached to this front of the module, right to the patient via electrodes. It's going to measure that ECG or electrocardiogram, which is going to be the electrical current of the heart. And at the same time, we'll also give a measurement or a number for respiration cycles and rates. So as a patient breathes in and then breathes out, it will be able to show that on the monitor. This is your ECG / resp module.